Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good morning and welcome. Today's presentation is Audubon at Home in Northern Virginia, and it is put on by Master Gardener and Audubon Ambassador Leslie Paulson. And Leslie, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. Today, I see from some of the names, some of you have probably heard me speak about this before, but it's basically going to be a talk on our wildlife habitat and the needs of the wildlife in our yard. All right, there it is. And Audubon and Prince William Extension are in partnership, and we both share a mission to educate people, though in this case, it'll be about wildlife. So this, to start with, is showing you a survey of the bird population. Birds are killed by collisions with power lines, cars, buildings, and they accounts for about 900 million deaths. Feral cats are one of the worst culprits, and actually house cats that are allowed to go outside are as well. The birds are also disturbed by light. And this is what we would like to see about in our yards or in the area, like from an airplane. It would be nice when you flew from place to place if you saw more trees below us instead of just bare land or grass. Habitat loss is a big problem for our native wildlife. The birds and insects face threats during all phases of their life history cycles. The breeding grounds, their wintering grounds, and even during migration. It's hard to find a place to rest and then feed so that they can go on to their destination. The habitat loss is by far the greatest factor. It's more than 2.5 times more influential than any other factor. And right now in the world, there are 460 different bird species that are listed as vulnerable, endangered, or critical. This is a dream environment for any wildlife, whether it's birds, insect, herps, salamanders, anything. This is what they'd like to find because there's places for making their homes. But what do they have instead? They have many housing developments that went up quickly in old farmland. Any trees that were there were cut down and then replaced by all these different Asian species. Because for some reason, the landscapers who work for builders favor Asian plants. And then we come up here where we look at, I would bet that this was taken on the Beltway in Maryland, because you have kudzu, honeysuckle, probably a couple other vines that I'm not able to identify. But 85% of our invasives are escapees from our own gardens, or at least their intended purpose. We disturb the land, and then we, by doing so, allow when birds come and sit, what we call like a hedgerow. Like if you want a quick hedgerow, you put 2 posts up, string a wire, and the birds will start planting whatever it is they ate. And that's probably what happened here. And climate change doesn't help either. So here we are again. Farmland transformed to instant neighborhoods. It's a monoculture of turf grass and then alien plant species. Lawns now cover an area 3 times larger than any irrigated crop in the United States. 43% has been developed into suburban homes like this. The average American yard doesn't provide much for birds to eat, or even places for them to hide from predators. Most likely the lawn will be half of their yard, and lawns are sterile environments most of the time. They have no value at all to our wildlife. As far as plants that might actually be valuable to wildlife, like trees, flowers, and shrubs, it's less than 1/5 of the yard, and plants in suburban and urban areas tend to be about 80% non-native. So you need to replace some of your yard turf specifically with native plants. So here is a great place that they could have done a wonderful job of having all different heights of trees, but instead they chose turf, which is now the largest agriculture crop in the United States. If any of you have read Doug Tallamy's first book, Bringing Nature Home, then you know how important our job is and what we can do so simply just by following some direction from him. And if you haven't read his book or have not heard him speak, I suggest the second link here, which will give you one of the recordings of Bringing Nature Home. The top link is to the Audubon website, where you can sign up for a visit and find out all kinds of other information about how to support our native wildlife. So the most important thing that Mother Nature has figured out, and we have to support it, is how to make a simple food web. You have creatures, birds, rodents, insects, butterflies, flowers, and other plants that support them, and they're all connected in one way or another. They either were food from someone for someone else, or they ate someone else to get where they are. And here are some of the baby birds that you might see in your yard. The most difficult job in the history of mankind has been to use the land without destroying it. And this is a quote from Aldo Leopold. Here I'm showing you some of the birds and what they eat. You have to have this food for them. It's quite varied, but it does get a little bit of repetitive from back between species. And at this time of the year, you can see birds that you will never see any other time except maybe when it's fall migration, because there are a lot of birds right now. This week I have red-breasted grosbeak, and I also have, oh shoot, the name just left me. It's the blue one, but it's not the bluebird. But it's just great to look outside and see what you can see. A world without insects is a world without birds. And even though we have a lot of birds that will eat the seed that we might provide or the seed they get out of trees, many of the baby birds need caterpillars, or else they just will not survive. Here are some of the 5 basic food groups for birds. Of course, like I said, insects, and 96% of terrestrial birds need caterpillars. It doesn't matter what caterpillar it is either. Then they need nectar plants, seeds, and fruit and berries and nuts. In our area, if you plant blueberries, you could plant your native persimmon. You could plant a native serviceberry, and they'll get the food they need. Here again is our chickadee. A chickadee is sort of the bird that tells us when there's something wrong. Because if you do not see any in your yard, it is because you do not have enough native plants. Chickadees, one family in your yard may mean that you're providing enough, but if you see several, like say a dozen or more coming and going, then you know you have a healthy yard, because chickadees need a yard that is 70% native plants. A chickadee pair brings 400 to 570 caterpillars to their nest every day. They feed their young for 16 days before they fledge. For that 16 days, you're talking 9,000 caterpillars. And this breed of bird also sometimes feeds their brood for another 3 weeks. So that is even more. This is a picture of what would be nice to see in your yard. First of all, you have our native plant, the ironweed, and look at it. You see all the holes in the leaves? That's great, because it tells you you have different insects and caterpillars there. Plants are the only organisms that can transform the energy of the sun into food. Native plants and insects co-evolved over millions of years. And so now we need to make sure we still have them in our yard. And our native insects are not adapted to feed on alien plant species, which is most of what we see in suburban landscapes today. And without native plants, we don't have insects. And without insects, you won't have birds. This gives you an idea of some of the best trees to provide caterpillars in your yard. If your yard is large enough, you could do an oak. White oak is the best. It is the one that has 537 different species of caterpillars that will feed on it. Willow, cherry are next, and that is a black cherry, not a Kwanzaa or a Kusa but our true native tree, which is black cherry. Birch, river birch is a native tree in this area. Crabapple trees are great, and blueberries, which are native, is like I said before, are good. And then the maple, pine, and hickory as well. Like here are these are from his book, Bringing Nature Home, Doug Tallamy's. So we already talked about the woody plants, but then we have the herbaceous plants. And as you can see, and as he will tell you, the two native plants that give you the most bang for your buck are goldenrods and asters. The only thing you need to understand, of course, is these mostly bloom in the fall, though there are some asters that bloom during the summer. So we also need to provide other species that bloom in the spring and in the summer as well. Joe Pye and boneset. Boneset is great. The only thing I would say to you is watch for when it goes to seed. That is usually at the teaching garden when we have them. It's usually when I cut it down because there are so many seeds on it. Morning glories. Some of us love it, some of us hate it, but still it feeds 39 different species. And then there's our native honeysuckle. So the yard on the left is what we usually see, but what we want to see is the landscape on the right, where we have more variation, we have dense cover for nesting and for hiding. So when you garden for wildlife, you truly want to think about this Healthy Yard Pledge. And think of it as well in conjunction with our Best Lawns program. If you join that and find out about what fertilizer you need, it helps because you can then reduce the fertilizer you use and then not worry so much if you get healthy grass and overseed every year. You won't need pesticides to kill the insects in it. You can plant native species and then conserve water. And again, we will, by doing this, we'll first do no harm, and then we can work with the landscape as well to provide what they need. Like I said, clean water structure, you need diversity. Manage any invasives you have. If you have an invasive plant, you really want to try to get rid of it. I know sometimes it is difficult. I'm having issues with the tree of heaven, the ailanthus. I'm slowly cutting them down, but I can't do them all at one time because of the expense. But you can slowly get rid of them, like one a year or something, which is what I've been doing. But then you need places for them to hide. And brush piles, they're not just throwing something there. You want to realize that the critters need the room to get in. So sometimes you want to put some larger branches so the holes and the openings are there. So there's a good place for them to hide. And when your leaves fall, let them be. Let them be the mulch for your plants. And then don't use chemicals or fertilizers and keep your cat indoors. This shows you what a healthy structure looks like in your yard. The first group of trees on the left, the canopy, these are more for larger yards. If you have less than 1/4 acre, it's going to be hard to have a large tree in your yard. But there's a lot of mid-stories that are native and understories, which are usually a lot of what the trees that people buy, like dogwood, and then some of the viburnums, which get quite tall, and even the rhododendrons. And this also shows you all the different birds that nest at this height of this type of tree. Vines are important too because a lot of vines provide berries. Even greenbrier provides a berry. And one of the reasons there's so much poison ivy, which is a native plant, is because it too can have berries, which the birds eat and then spread. And then you'll see the meadow plants, which are important, and you can plant in your yard at the back of the bed because they get a bit taller. So what can we do to create wildlife habitat? Your yard does not need to be manicured. In my yard, when you drive by, it looks great. But when you walk up and come in, look at some of my beds, especially the ones along the driveway, you'll realize that I have a lot of things in there that I wish I didn't. Some of it, I've been trying for years to get rid of the Bermuda grass in there, but I just keep, when I can, I cut it. Doug Tellamy recommends that we don't always pull up our weeds. He says, just cut them back. The reason being that you're disturbing the soil, which again allows for more weed seeds to come up. But if you plant close together, you can choke out a lot of that over time. And if you keep the edge of that bed clean, people don't notice as much what you got planted there. So in order to have your wildlife habitat looked at, an ambassador or two will come visit your yard. You can ask questions, we'll give you advice. And even later, after the visit is done, you can still get back in touch and we will be happy to answer your questions. And we'll give you a lot of online resources that are out there. And you have to just observe at least 10 sanctuary species. And you can create a wildlife sanctuary. But the other thing you truly have to have as well is you have to have the presence of native plants. If I or an ambassador sees that you don't look like you have enough, we sometimes suggest if there's room, just creating a new bed, which is an instant bed, where you don't have to go about removing plants to get started. And you pick maybe 3 to 5 plants, depending upon the size of the bed, and plant and choose 3 types of plants that bloom at different times of the year and maybe are different heights, and plant them in multiples of at least 3 or 5 or more. So that does make a statement. Don't forget to tell your neighbors about us as well. So here are the birds that are on the sanctuary list. The whole entire woodpecker series is on. And I think since I've put this on here, I think it's the hawk species as well. So that's a lot of different birds you can see. Of the birds sitting here, I have seen probably all of these in my yard in the last year, except the green heron and the tree swallow. And then there's the other wildlife, the butterflies and the insects, and then the amphibians and reptiles and mammals, which are also important. Excuse me. So this shows you a map, which I'm sure is not up to date right now, but give you an idea of marking green areas in Northern Virginia area with the homes that have been certified. We're trying to create green corridors. But we are in many counties in Northern Virginia, as well as Fauquier and Rappahannock. This again shows you a yard that is inviting to all of the wildlife. It has different levels and trees, which is a good thing for everyone. Just think about turtles, our box turtles, trying to hide for the winter, where they dig a hole in the soil and then just cover up it for the winter. You want to leave a lot of the plants as well, that especially the ones that bloom late summer into fall. You don't want to cut those plants down to the ground until late March or the beginning of April. I'm skipping that because this presentation is longer than that. That's when I don't show pictures. I'm just showing you a picture of a cat with a collar that is supposed to help it be seen by birds. I'm not sure how well it works, but it's worth a try if you absolutely have to put your cat outside. Do remember too, there are times of the days when if you are going to put a cat out, is better than not putting it out. excuse me. At dawn, like say dinner time till dusk, and dawn through breakfast hours, about the first 2 to 3 hours in the morning and in the evening, that is when the birds feed. So don't let your cat out then. This is Pork Chop. He's my cat, and he only goes out on a leash. But it has to, we've learned it has to be a tight leash because cats still, even on a leash, are fast. Here again, I'm just showing you some of the decline of birds and for what different reasons there are. I don't know if any of you have seen, if you Google like Washington Post and then put collisions on buildings with birds, you'll find articles about all the birds that are killed at night in the tall buildings in DC. It's really sad. This is showing you that you can have a habitat as small as a deck on an apartment building. This was Maria and Jason, who are two of our master gardeners' apartment before they bought their home. So you can turn your life into a wildlife sanctuary by doing all the things that are important. You give them native plants for food and shelter, water, stop using chemicals, make your windows visible, and keep cats indoors. This is a fairly new program that Doug Tellamy has. It's the Homegrown National Park. If you go there, he asks you to join up and then let him know about your home. He's trying to get enough people on that there'll be yards that put together will be more acreage than all our national parks put together. So now I'm going to show you some of the native plants that would do well in your yard and provide help to our native wildlife. These are sundrops or anathra. I like this plant because you can put it inside, you can put it in the shade or in the sun and it still blooms. And the bees and hummingbirds love it. Our native cardinal flower, and of course, is a favorite of our hummingbirds, but also other insects and birds. You need to remember with this plant, sometimes people think they have died, but this plant only blooms every other year. And then Liatris is great. The other thing is even all the cultivars of Liatris, of which there are several, they're the same color of flower and the same color of leaf. And that's a cultivar that will work. When someone comes up with a cultivar, and I'm going to use coneflower, even though it's not native to our area, just to explain it to you. So our native coneflower, not here in Northern Virginia, but other parts of Virginia, of the colors and the leaves. But then they change the color of the flower, say yellow, white, orange. Well, the insects don't come to that because they're looking for the color in their spectrum that they are used to feeding on. So it's not a good choice. Coreopsis, this is the thin leaf Coreopsis. And you can see there's some different kinds of bees on that one. Mountain mint, whether it's the one pictured here or the thin mountain mint, are great pollinator plants. This one, you can go outside in the summer and see so many different bees on it at once. You see here, there's some tiny little solitary bees, but it's just humming with worker bees gathering pollen. And then the Rudbeckia family, which is a very large family in our native plants. Here we have both the Herta, the Fulgida, and the black-eyed Susan. And some people, some of them, I know there are plants that sometimes tend to mildew on the leaves, but I'm telling you, it's okay. The insects do not care. And here are some of our penstemons. The best one is the upper right corner one because it's white. The flower is white. When you change it to pink, like I said, you really don't see any bees on there. If you see any bees on there, they're probably going to be honeybees, which aren't a native bee anyway. And our native honeysuckle. The good thing about this honeysuckle is the fact that it starts flowering sometimes in late March and all the way into December, which gives it pollen and nectar for a very long time. And that's a sphinx moth down there and a hummingbird in the other one. And then Monarda, which is truly one of the plants that tends to be mildew, but like I said, it doesn't matter. It attracts a lot of different butterflies and hummingbirds and insects as well. And here is the one I told you is such a good species to choose, Solidago. And truly all of the different Solidagos all have yellow flowers, so they pretty much like them all. And there are several that are native to Northern Virginia, but you can see all the different bees and wasps and little moths and things that come to this plant. And then our aster. We have New England aster, and then there's also the New York aster. And then there is wood asters. And I know in our plant sale, we have a couple other one. I think one was called calico, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but it isn't one that I'm as familiar with, but we have a couple of them in our plant sale. And here we have our native Columbine, which is truly a hummingbird magnet. And you know, it is an early bloomer. And I know this year I had hummingbirds come back in April. So they were here just as the flowers were blooming. And then we have all the milkweed that is native to our area. We have it can be our native common milkweed, swamp milkweed. And in a bit, I'll show you a picture of another kind. Here's what the caterpillar looks like. And the common milkweed is on the left with a praying mantis that is not a native praying mantis. So here is our butterfly weed, which is another native milkweed. See all the fritillaries, they look so pretty on there. And then we have native grasses too, which are also important. These grasses, again, like I said, should not be cut down until the spring because it's a place for insects and whatnot to winter over. The one on the right, the Shenandoah panicum, is our native. I think the one on the left may be heavy metal because it's greener. It's a place for mammals to hide as well. And then we have witch hazel here, which is an early bloomer as well. You can go to the teaching garden, you'll see it in January, it's in bloom. And then the serviceberry I spoke of earlier, these are edible berries for humans too, but it's hard to get them because the birds all love this berry. And it does sometimes get rust if you have cedars nearby or apple trees. But I asked Doug Tellamy and he says it does not harm the birds at all. So don't worry about the rust. It doesn't, the birds that feed on it don't care and it doesn't hurt them. This is one of the beds from the Juvenile Detention Center that we put in several years ago. I haven't gone this year to peek through the fence to see if it's still there because we still are not doing visits there. But you can see we have the native Monarda. We have brown-eyed Susans are the tall ones and the swamp milkweed. And the thin mint is the green that is at the base of that little lighthouse. And again, this is one of the monarchs that we found in that enclosure on the milkweed. This shows you what our flyer looks like, and it just brings to your attention all the important things about how to do this program. Here we see a cedar waxwing, by the way, is that middle bird. I have that bird in my yard as well. So I thank you. And again, I leave you with another quote from Aldo Leopold. The man was an early thinker about what we truly needed in our yard. So does anybody have any questions? I
don't see any in the chat box.
Well, there's something in there. Is that just welcomes?
Who can see the message?
Yeah, it's just, yeah. So if anyone is in it who hasn't had a visit, if you are interested in a visit, you can go to just, if you Google Audubon at Home, it will come up and you're on the main page. You go down to about the middle of the page and there's an orange oblong, I call it, that says click here if you are interested in our program, and you just do that, put all your information in, and then it sends an email to me and I'll get in touch with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie.
You're welcome. This talk, I swear, it's like, I try to slow down, but that's why I like questions, because then it helps. But I do hope if you are already in the program, please tell your friends and neighbors about us. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome, Thomas.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. We will be on break for a week, and then we'll come back in 2 weeks with, I believe, scouting for insects on your plants. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good week.
You too. Come to our plant sale.
Rain or shine.
Yep. Thank you much.